Who would have thought that my wife, after such a long and strong marriage, would do this to me? I'm 53 years old, and I've spent decades building a successful hotel business that I'm proud of. I've worked hard to create a comfortable life for my family, my wife, my son, and my daughter. But now it all seems to be slipping away faster than I can comprehend. It all started a few months ago. I'd been feeling under the weather for a while, tired, sluggish, just not myself. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Running a big business like mine can take its toll. But when the fatigue persisted and I started losing weight without trying, I knew something was seriously wrong. I went to the doctor, hoping for some simple explanation, maybe a vitamin deficiency or something minor. But what I got was much worse, a diagnosis of high-grade diabetes, so severe that the doctors told me I might have a year to live, maybe less. I was in shock. How could this happen to me? I was still young, at least I felt young. I still had so much to do. But the reality was inescapable. I was dying, and I had to come to terms with that fact. My family was devastated when I told them. My wife, who is 44 and has been by my side for over 20 years, couldn't stop crying. My son, who is 23 and runs his own luxury auto repair shop, was quiet and withdrawn, not knowing what to say. My daughter, who is only 20 and works as a receptionist at one of our hotels, looked at me as if she couldn't believe it, as if she was waiting for me to tell her that this was all some kind of stupid joke. But it wasn't a joke. This was my new reality. When the shock wore off, I realized I needed to start making plans. My business, my wealth, I couldn't take any of it with me, but I could decide what would happen to it after I was gone. It was time to get my affairs in order. I started with the house, a large country estate that had been our family home for years. It was a beautiful place, surrounded by acres of land, with a view that stretched for miles. I decided to divide it between my children. My son would get the main house, where he could live and maybe someday start his own family. My daughter would get a guest house and some land. Enough so she could have her own space to feel independent, but still close to home. Then there was the apartment in New York, a high-rise condo that my wife and I had bought years ago as a place to stay when we were in town on business. It was luxurious, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered stunning views of the skyline. I decided my daughter would have that, too. She worked in the city, and I thought she would enjoy having her own place, something to remind her of me. As for the cars, a sleek black Mercedes and a vintage Aston Martin, I knew my son would treasure them most. He had always been a car enthusiast, and they weren't just vehicles. They were symbols of the life I had built. With him, they would be in good hands. But the most important part of my assets, the hotels, I decided to leave to my wife. She had been with me from the very beginning, helping me build the business from scratch. She was more responsible than I had ever been, more organized, more level-headed. I trusted her completely. I knew she could handle it, that she would continue what I had started and keep the business thriving. But boy, was I wrong. As soon as I made those decisions, I felt a sense of relief. It was as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I could focus on spending what time I had left with my family, enjoying the little moments we too often take for granted. My wife, bless her, went out of her way to make me feel comfortable. She made all my favorite foods, like her apple cinnamon pie, a recipe she perfected when we were first married. She even suggested that we take short trips together, to places we had always wanted to go but never had time for. We would sit on the porch of our country house, watching the sunset, and talk about the good times we had, the memories we had. It was nice. It felt like we were reconnecting after so many years of being so busy with life. My children were busy with their own lives, but they also made time for me. My son would come over after work, sometimes in one of his fancy cars, and we would talk about business, about life. He was always so proud of what he had accomplished, and I was proud of him, too. My daughter would stop by after work, bringing me little gifts from town, a book she thought I would like, a bottle of wine, a new shirt. She was always so caring, so kind. For a while, everything felt almost normal, like we could pretend that nothing had changed, that I wasn't sick. But deep down, I knew things were different. I knew I was on borrowed time. Then, one day, something shifted. It was subtle at first, so subtle that I almost didn't notice it. My wife, who had been so attentive, so caring, started to seem distant. She was still doing all the same things. cooking, suggesting trips, sitting with me on the porch. But there was something off, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. She started spending more time on her phone, texting and emailing, saying it was business-related. At first, I didn't think much of it. She had always helped with the business, and I trusted her. But then she started going out more, saying she had to meet with clients or take care of some business at one of the hotels. Again, I didn't think much of it. She was managing the hotels now, after all. But something about the way she was acting made me uneasy. I tried to ignore it, tried to push it out of my mind. After all, I was dying. I didn't want to spend my last days worrying about something that might be nothing. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more it nagged at me. Something wasn't right. I could feel it. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, I decided to ask her about it. I kept my tone light, casual, like I was just curious. "You've been busy lately," I said. "Everything okay at the hotels?" She looked at me, a little too quickly, and gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Everything's fine," she said. "Just some routine stuff. You know how it is." I nodded, but the unease in my gut didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. A few days later, I got a call from one of my old business partners. We hadn't spoken in a while, so I was surprised to hear from him. He asked how I was doing, and we made small talk for a bit before he got to the point. He told me he had heard some things that didn't sit right with him. He didn't want to go into detail over the phone, but he suggested we meet in person to talk. It turned out that my wife had been more than just busy. She had been making moves behind my back, doing things with the business that I hadn't approved of. But all this lasted until one moment. After the conversation with my business partner, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The man had been around for decades, someone who knew the ins and outs of the industry, and if he had concerns, they weren't to be taken lightly. Still, I tried to put it out of my mind, hoping that maybe it was just a misunderstanding, something that could be easily explained. But the more I tried to convince myself of that, the more the nagging feeling in my gut told me otherwise. A few weeks later, things took an even stranger turn. I decided to pay a visit to one of my main hotels in New York, the flagship of my entire operation. It wasn't often that I went there personally anymore, not since I'd started handing off more responsibilities to others, but something inside me told me I needed to go. When I arrived, I was greeted as usual by the staff, polite, professional, the kind of people who knew how to handle guests in a top-tier establishment. But as I walked through the lobby and made my way to my office, I noticed a few of them exchanging glances. It was subtle, just the kind of thing you might miss if you weren't paying attention, but I was paying attention. I made my way to my office, a sleek space on the top floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. It was a view I'd loved for years, one that had inspired me to keep pushing, keep growing the business. But today, the view offered no comfort. After settling in, I decided to talk to some of the staff, the ones I trusted to tell me what was really going on. It didn't take long before I started hearing whispers about my wife. She'd been spending more time at the hotel lately, which I knew about, but what I didn't know was that she wasn't just handling business. According to several staff members, a young head administrator, barely 30, had been showing her a lot of attention. At first, she brushed it off, they said, but lately, she'd started to flirt back, accepting his compliments and engaging in light banter that seemed to be going beyond what was appropriate. I felt a surge of anger I hadn't felt in years. It was like a fire igniting in my chest, something that made me want to storm out of the office and confront them both right then and there. But I held back, trying to keep my emotions in check. I needed to think this through. I needed to be smart about this. The next day, I decided to pay another visit to the hotel, this time with a specific purpose in mind. I wasn't there just to check on the business. I was there to confront the administrator. I wasn't someone who minced words, especially not in business. I'd built my empire by being straightforward and firm, and this situation would be no different. When I arrived, I didn't waste any time. I had the administrator summoned to my office immediately. He arrived with a confident smile, probably thinking he was about to get some sort of praise or promotion. But that smile quickly faded when he saw the look on my face. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "I've been hearing some things that don't sit well with me," I began, my voice steady but cold. "I've heard that you've been getting a little too familiar with my wife." He blinked, clearly taken aback, but he recovered quickly. "It's nothing personal, sir," he said, his voice oozing with false sincerity. "I was just trying to get closer to her to, maybe get a raise or a promotion down the line. I apologize if it came off the wrong way." His explanation did little to calm the storm brewing inside me, but I kept my composure. I praised him for his ingenuity, for being bold enough to think outside the box, but I also made it crystal clear that there were boundaries that could not be crossed. I made sure he understood that this little game he was playing would end immediately, or there would be serious consequences. When I left the hotel that day, I felt a small sense of relief. I'd confronted the situation head-on, and the administrator had backed down. But that relief was short-lived. There was still something gnawing at me, something that made me feel like I hadn't seen the whole picture yet. Later that evening, when I got home, I decided to talk to my wife about it. She was in the kitchen, cooking dinner like she often did, and I sat down at the table, watching her as she moved around. I waited until she seemed relaxed, then I brought it up. "I was at the hotel today," I said, trying to sound casual, "and I talked to the head administrator. I heard he's been getting a little too friendly with you." She paused, just for a second, before continuing with what she was doing. "He's just being nice," she said, her tone dismissive. "I've been really tired lately, and it's nice to have someone be kind to me. It's nothing more than that." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that it was just a simple misunderstanding, that she was just stressed out and needed some support. But there was something in her voice, something in the way she didn't meet my eyes, that made me wonder if there was more to the story. Still, I didn't push it. I was exhausted from the day, and I didn't have the energy to keep digging. I told her I understood, that I just wanted to make sure everything was okay, and then I went to bed. But I couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything, trying to figure out if I was being paranoid, or if there was something real behind my suspicions. The next morning, I woke up early, but my wife was already gone. That wasn't unusual. She often left early to take care of business at the hotel. But today, it felt different. I got up, got dressed, and decided to head to the hotel myself. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I felt like I needed to see for myself what was going on. When I arrived, the place was buzzing with the usual activity. Guests were checking in and out, staff were busy with their tasks, and everything seemed normal. But as I made my way to my wife's office, I noticed that something was off. The head administrator wasn't at his desk, and when I checked my wife's office, it was empty too. A feeling of dread settled in my stomach. I asked one of the junior administrators if they'd seen my wife, and they told me she'd gone to room 52. That struck me as odd. My wife never went to the rooms. Her work was strictly in the office, dealing with finances and paperwork. Why would she be in a guest room? I didn't waste any time. I made my way to room 52, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was going to find, but I had a sick feeling that it wasn't going to be good. When I reached the door, I hesitated for just a moment before using my spare key to unlock it. The room was quiet, the curtains drawn, and it took a second for my eyes to adjust to the dim light. But when they did, what I saw made my blood run cold. There, lying in the bed, were my wife and the head administrator, asleep in each other's arms. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, staring at the scene in front of me like it was some kind of twisted nightmare. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but nothing made sense. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But it was real. It was happening. I wanted to scream, to shout, to throw something, but instead, I just stood there, numb. Eventually, I turned and left the room, closing the door quietly behind me. They didn't even wake up. They didn't even know I'd been there. I walked back to my car in a daze, the world around me feeling distant and surreal. It was like I was moving through a fog, unable to think clearly, unable to process what had just happened. When I reached my Aston Martin, I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring out the windshield, not seeing anything. It was like a bad dream, but no matter how hard I tried to wake up, I couldn't. Eventually, I started the car and drove home, the miles passing in a blur. I barely made it back, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. When I finally pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine, I just sat there for a long time, trying to figure out what to do next. Sitting in the car outside my house for 2 hours felt like an eternity. My mind raced, replaying the image of my wife and the head administrator lying together in that hotel bed. I couldn't believe it. The woman I'd shared my life with, the woman I trusted more than anyone, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. The pain was unbearable, gnawing at my insides like a relentless beast. I had to do something, anything, to make it stop. And that's when it hit me. I couldn't trust anyone anymore. Not my wife, not even my own judgment. Everything I'd built, everything I'd worked for, suddenly seemed meaningless. But if I couldn't trust her, then I sure as hell wouldn't let her benefit from my life's work. The thought of her enjoying the fruits of my labor with another man made my blood boil. So, I made a decision. I was going to take everything away from her, strip her of the life she thought she could have after betraying me. The decision to exact my revenge wasn't easy. I'd always prided myself on being a fair man, someone who believed in justice and doing what was right. But this wasn't about fairness. This was about pain, my pain, and I needed her to feel it too. I finally got out of the car and walked into the house. It was quiet, too quiet, and every step I took echoed in my mind, reminding me of the emptiness that now filled my heart. Unfortunately, thanks to my diabetes, I couldn't drown my sorrows in alcohol. So instead, I just sat in my office, staring at the wall, feeling the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. When my wife came home that evening, I played my part well. I didn't let on that I knew about the affair. I greeted her as usual, asked her about her day, and even managed to muster a smile when she talked about how exhausted she was from work. The whole time, I was seething inside, but I kept it hidden. I needed her to believe everything was normal, that I was still the clueless husband she thought I was. After dinner, as we sat in the living room, I casually suggested that she take a vacation. "You've been working so hard lately," I said, forcing my voice to sound concerned. "You deserve a break. How about a trip to Hawaii? You've always wanted to go." Her eyes lit up at the suggestion. She'd mentioned Hawaii before, how she longed to escape the gray skies of New York and spend a week basking in the sun. Of course, she had no idea that my offer was anything but generous. I told her I'd handle everything at the hotel while she was away, that she didn't need to worry about a thing. She was thrilled, and 2 days later, she and a friend were on a plane to paradise. But while she was enjoying the beaches and the warm ocean breeze, I was putting my plan into motion. I'd spent years building my business empire, and now, in a matter of days, I was going to tear it all down. It wasn't an easy decision. After all, my hotels were more than just a business. They were a part of me, a testament to my hard work and dedication. But the thought of my wife benefiting from any of it made my decision clear. I couldn't let her have it. I wouldn't. I started making calls, contacting potential buyers who I knew would jump at the chance to acquire my properties. But I wasn't looking for the highest bidder. No, I wanted this done quickly, before she returned from Hawaii. I was willing to sell everything at a fraction of its worth, just to make sure she ended up with nothing. My business partners were shocked, confused. They couldn't understand why I was selling off everything so fast, and for such a low price. But I didn't care. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. This was my decision, my revenge. By the time my wife's vacation was coming to an end, the deals were done. My entire empire, everything I'd worked so hard for, was gone. Sold off to the highest, well, the fastest, bidders. The money I received was nothing compared to what the hotels were truly worth, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that she would come back to nothing. I'll never forget the look on her face when she walked through the door and found me sitting in the living room, waiting for her. At first, she was all smiles, eager to tell me about her trip. But when she saw the expression on my face, the color drained from her cheeks. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I know," I said quietly, not needing to elaborate. She knew exactly what I was talking about. Her eyes widened in shock, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was speechless, caught completely off guard. "I know about the affair," I continued, my voice steady even though my heart was pounding in my chest. "I know about you and the head administrator. I saw you." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she started to shake her head. "It's not what you think," she stammered, but I cut her off. "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't insult me by trying to lie. I know everything. And while you were off enjoying yourself in Hawaii, I made sure you wouldn't be enjoying anything when you got back." She stared at me, not understanding at first. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I sold everything," I said, watching her reaction closely. "The hotels, the properties, all of it. It's gone. And you? You get nothing. No business, no money, nothing." Her jaw dropped, and for a moment, she looked like she might faint. She stumbled backward, catching herself on the arm of the couch. You can't be serious," she whispered, as if she was trying to convince herself it wasn't true. "Oh, I'm very serious," I replied. My tone as cold as the anger burning inside me. "You betrayed me, and now you're going to pay for it. You're out of my life. And as far as the kids are concerned, you're out of theirs too. I've told them everything, and they want nothing to do with you." Her face crumpled as she began to cry, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no pity, just a deep, hollow emptiness. I'd given her everything, and she'd thrown it all away for some cheap thrill with a younger man. Now, she was reaping the consequences. "Please," she sobbed, falling to her knees. "We can work this out. I'll do anything. Just give me a chance to explain." But I was done listening. I stood up, looking down at her with a mixture of disgust and sorrow. "There's nothing to explain," I said, turning away from her. "Get out. I don't want to see you again." She tried to argue, to plead with me, but I didn't listen. I couldn't listen. I walked out of the room, leaving her there, broken and defeated. It was done. The revenge I'd so carefully planned had been executed, but as I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I felt no satisfaction, no relief. Just an overwhelming sense of loss. I'd destroyed everything. My business, my marriage, my family life. All because of her betrayal. And now, all I had left were the few months the doctors had told me I had to live. In the days that followed, I finalized the sale of my remaining assets. Half of the money went to charity, as I'd planned, and the other half was split between my children. They'd supported me through all of this, standing by my side as I dismantled everything I'd built. They were all I had left now, and I was determined to make sure they had something to remember me by, something to carry on my legacy after I was gone. But for me, there was nothing left. My life had been reduced to a series of empty days, each one blending into the next as I waited for the inevitable. My wife, no, my ex-wife, had tried to contact me a few times, but I ignored her. There was nothing more to say. I'd gotten my revenge, and now, all that remained was the slow, painful descent into the end. And so I waited, alone with my thoughts, the weight of my decisions pressing down on me as I counted the days until it was all over.